Blood pooled beneath me, warm against the cold tiles of our living room floor. My vision blurred as I watched my own mother step over my body. She didn't even look at me. Her only concern was for my brother, who was whining over a scraped knee. Her heel pressed into my ribs like I was nothing more than an obstacle. I tried to call her name, but the sound came out broken, swallowed by blood in my throat. She never turned. She cradled Daniel in her arms, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you." The knife wound in my side burned, but the betrayal cut deeper. That night, I learned the truth. My life meant nothing to her compared to his. From the very beginning, Daniel was the sun in our family, and I was the shadow left behind. His birthdays were grand feasts, while mine were an afterthought. My good grades were ignored, while his mediocre efforts were celebrated. When he failed, excuses were made. When I succeeded, it was brushed aside. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself maybe one day she would notice me, but lying there, bleeding while she stepped over me, I realized she never would. It all began because of him. Daniel had a talent for ruining lives, not just his own. He gambled, drank, borrowed money he couldn't repay, and each time he fell, Mother rushed to lift him back up. I worked nights to help pay bills, while she mortgaged the house for his debts. Still, nothing was ever enough. That night, men came to our door, dark suits, cold eyes. They wanted payment. Daniel owed them more than he could ever repay. He sat on the couch silent, cowardly, while Mother screamed about injustice. I stepped forward, foolishly believing I could protect them. I told the men we'd find a way, but they didn't want promises. They wanted proof. Later, in a smoky back room, I tried to reason with men who didn't care about reason. Words turned sharp, and before I could react, a knife tore across my side. The world tilted, and they dragged me back home, tossing me like broken furniture onto the floor. "Get him to pay," they warned, before disappearing into the night. And that's when the truth revealed itself in its ugliest form. My mother didn't cry for me. She didn't panic. She didn't even check if I was breathing. She stepped over me to get to Daniel. Her hands fussed over his knee, her voice soothing him like he was a child. Meanwhile, I lay there in a growing pool of blood, invisible in the house I grew up in. As darkness closed in, memories flashed before me. The empty chair at my award ceremony because she was busy taking Daniel to practice. The necklace my grandmother left me, pawned to cover his debts. The nights I spent alone, while she laughed with him in the kitchen. I had always been the sacrifice, the unwanted burden. But as my body grew weak, something stronger than pain filled me. Rage. Not wild or desperate, but sharp, steady, and cold. If I survived this night, I swore I would never again beg for love that was never mine. I would rise no matter how long it took. And when I did, they would finally feel what it meant to be abandoned. I woke up to the steady beep of machines and the stench of antiseptic. My side stitched, but my heart hollow. And the first thing I noticed wasn't the pain. It was the emptiness of the chair beside me. No flowers, no visitors, no mother waiting in tears. Only silence and the pity in a nurse's eyes when she told me my mother had signed Daniel's release papers and never returned. As if my survival was a nuisance, not a miracle. And in that moment, the wound inside me deepened into something sharper than grief. It became resolve. So when I dragged myself out of bed days later, weak and dizzy, I swore I would never again beg for love that was never mine. And though I left the hospital with nothing but bruises and anger, that was enough, because anger can be forged into something stronger than steel. I scrubbed floors, served tables, lifted crates in warehouses, anything that would give me coins to save. And each insult, each sneer, each moment of exhaustion became kindling for the fire inside me. While Daniel burned money in bars and Mother praised him for simply breathing, I was building myself piece by piece in the shadows. By day, I bent my back for wages. By night, I bent my mind over borrowed books, teaching myself accounting, law, strategy, even learning the art of negotiation by listening to wealthy patrons at their tables while I poured their wine. And slowly I discovered the truth that terrified and thrilled me. The world didn't care who my mother loved. It only cared who was clever enough, ruthless enough, to seize it. Years blurred together, and the girl they had stepped over on the floor became a woman no one could ignore. I opened a tiny consultancy firm, then another, solving problems that others couldn't, turning failure into profit, ruin into rebirth, and soon my name was spoken in boardrooms where men twice my age lowered their voices when I entered. Not out of respect, but out of fear, which is better. I gained wealth, not the shallow kind Daniel wasted, but the kind that bought influence, silence, doors opening where they used to slam shut. And all the while, I never forgot the house I had left behind, because vengeance is patient. And I watched them from afar. Daniel drowning in new debts, Mother selling memories to save him, both of them laughing at parties they couldn't afford, as if the world owed them a safety net, blind to the storm already weaving around them. What they didn't see was me behind the curtain, pulling threads one by one, banks denying Daniel, investors walking away, contracts dissolving like smoke, none of it coincidence, all of it me, the invisible hand stripping away their illusions until nothing remained but the brittle pride that once left me bleeding on the floor. And as I stood in the city I now commanded, I knew the time was coming when I would walk back through the door of that house not as the forgotten daughter, but as the reckoning they had unknowingly raised. I chose winter to go back, a sharp metallic cold that felt honest. And when I stood before the house that had once been my cage, paint peeling, gardens strangled by weeds, a crooked gutter dribbling rust, I felt nothing like nostalgia, only the clean click of purpose sliding into place. I didn't knock. I turned the handle and entered the living room where the last of my girlhood had bled into the grout. And there they were, mid-argument. Daniel pacing with the erratic swagger of a man who has run out of bets. Mother clutching a stack of final notices like talismans, their voices scraping over the same old melody of blame and denial until my presence bent the air. Daniel froze first. Then Mother looked up and went pale the way a liar does when the past walks back in on two steady legs. And for a beat, we were all silent. The tick of the old clock counting down to the end of the world they'd built on my bones. I set a leather folder on the table exactly where my blood had once pooled, and opened it with deliberate care. Deeds, transfers, liens, the slow, lawful noose I had braided over years, every account they depended on now reported to me. The mortgage note had been bought by a holding company with an innocent name and my signature hidden in its spine. The debts Daniel owed had been consolidated and purchased for cents on the dollar by another shell that answered to my office. And the friend who had promised him a loan last month had only promised me his silence. I watched comprehension strike, then panic, then a childish fury that fluttered in Daniel's chest like a trapped bird. He lunged for the papers, and two of my associates, stone-still men in dark coats who did not need to raise their voices to fill a room, stepped forward, not touching him, merely occupying the space where his bravado lived. He backed away, snarling, calling me names he'd learned in bars. Words meant to reduce me to the size I once accepted, but words bounce off steel. Mother tried a different weapon. Her voice softened, her eyes shined, and she reached for a script that had always gotten her what she wanted. "You can't do this," she said, as if the sentence were a spell. "We're family." The word landed with no more weight than a feather. "Family?" I echoed, not angry, just curious, like a scientist examining a specimen. "When I lay on this floor and you stepped over me, was that family? When you pawned my future to buy his second chance, third chance, eighth chance, was that family?" She flinched, but only briefly, then rallied with the old refrain. "I was ungrateful. I was cold. I didn't understand a mother's love. A mother protects her weakest child." "You didn't protect the weakest," I said, and let the memory of warm blood and cold tile do the explaining. I slid the last document across the table, a notice of termination of right of occupancy and a 30-day buyout offer that was far kinder than the world had ever been to me, and told them the house would be renovated, sold, and the proceeds, after settling the consolidated debts, would leave them with exactly what they had earned. A small, clean remainder, and the chance to start over without the illusion of safety. Daniel exploded then, spitting that I was a thief, that I owed him, that everything I had came from this family. I laughed, soft and disbelieving, because he truly believed it, because in the church of our home I had been taught to tithe my life to his appetites. I told him the only thing I owed was an honest mirror, and I held it up. A man who hid behind a mother's skirts, a boy who borrowed spines from everyone in the room and returned them bent. He charged anyway, because that is what boys do when the story says they're the hero. He reached me, grabbed my coat lapels, and for a second I saw the alley, the knife, the girl I used to be. Then one of my associates took his wrists and set them gently at his sides as if reshelving a book. Mother sagged into a chair and began to cry. Not the keening grief of loss, but the thin, performative tears of a woman expecting the universe to bargain with her. I did not bargain. Instead, I gave her something she had never given me. Clarity. I am not here to hurt you, I said. I'm here to end the cycle where your love buys his sins on credit and sends the bill to me. I told her about the foundations I'd funded in the city, the sober housing, the job programs, the clinic wing with beds for people who wake up alone in hospitals the way I did, and how mercy, properly applied, is not an indulgence but a boundary. I offered Daniel a place in one of those programs under an assumed name, no special favors, no shortcuts, just a bed, a counselor, a shift schedule, and the chance to construct a life with his own hands. He sneered at it, of course, because real work does not sparkle, and Mother called it cruel because it did not place him back on the throne she had built. But I was no longer auditioning for their approval. When they realized the world would not rewind on command, their anger dissolved into pleading, then into the quiet blank where consequences live. Papers were signed. Keys were surrendered. I walked through the rooms one last time, touching door frames that had once framed arguments, peering into the kitchen where I had eaten silence for dinner, stepping into the hallway where a younger me had listened to their laughter bleed under the door. In the bathroom mirror, I found my face and recognized it at last. Not pretty or harsh, simply correct. A face that belonged to its owner. As I reached the front door, Mother called my name in a voice I hadn't heard since I was small. A voice that asked for rescue. I turned. "Did you ever love me?" I asked. A question I hadn't meant to ask, the last childish splinter easing itself out. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Whatever answer she had belonged to the old world, and the old world was gone. I stepped into the cold. Snow had begun, thin and sincere, erasing footprints as it fell. I thought of the girl on the tiles and of the woman beside her who did not bend. And I understood that revenge, when tempered, is simply the restoration of truth. You cannot step over what you are forced to face. I did not look back. The house would become another person's home. The debts would settle into numbers. Daniel would either accept the hard mercy I'd offered or run until the road ran out. And Mother would learn that love without accountability is not love at all. Only indulgence in a prettier dress. As for me, I went to the clinic wing and signed the final funding documents, then stood in a corridor where monitors beeped like metronomes for the living. A nurse passed with a bouquet someone else would receive, and I felt, not triumph, but a grounded, level quiet. The sound of a life I had built with my own hands. When I finally turned off the lights in my office that night, the city outside was a constellation of second chances, and somewhere between the stars, I placed one last promise. I will not be the girl on the floor again, and no daughter who finds this place in her darkest hour will be either.